At exactly 10 in the morning, inside the cold wood-panelled halls of the High Court of the United Kingdom, the silence was broken by the rhythmic strike of a gavel. This was not just a legal formality. It was the sound of a multi-million-dollar crusade hitting a brick wall. On a heavy oak table sat a 45-page document, bound and stamped with the red seal of the High Court. At the very top, in bold, uncompromising letters, were two words that would change the course of royal history. Claim dismissed. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, had spent years and millions of dollars waging a war against the publisher of the Daily Mail, alleging illegal information gathering. He had positioned himself as a champion of truth, a man on a mission to clean up the British press. But as the judgment was read, the narrative of the noble crusader disintegrated. The court didn't just reject his claims, it dismantled his credibility. The financial wreckage left in the wake of this 30-second announcement is nothing short of catastrophic. We are talking about a total loss of $67 million. To put that into perspective, $67 million is enough to fund and operate an entire small-scale public health system for a year. It is a sum that could build schools, staff, hospitals, or provide social housing for thousands. Instead, that capital has effectively evaporated, consumed by legal fees and compensatory damages. This is the ultimate failure of moral mathematics, spending the wealth of a small nation on a personal vendetta that ended in total defeat. The reaction from royal observers was swift and cutting. The renowned author and investigative journalist Tom Bower was overheard commenting on the gravity of the moment. He reportedly remarked that this was far more than a civil loss. He stated that the true tragedy was watching Harry be exposed as a man who struggled to tell the truth while under oath in his father's own court. The weight of that statement is immense. It suggests that the Duke did not just lose a case. He lost the one thing money cannot buy: his reputation for integrity. Witnesses near the legal teams described a scene of stunned silence as the numbers were finalised. One barrister was overheard whispering to a colleague that they had never seen a claimant lose so much ground so quickly. They noted that the $67 million figure was not just a bill, it was a public indictment of a strategy based on emotion rather than evidence. Before we audit exactly where that $67 million is going and who is really paying the price, take a moment to join our community. If you believe that accountability should apply to everyone regardless of their title, hit the like button right now. It helps this analysis reach those who are tired of the spin. If you want to keep track of the real costs behind the royal headlines, subscribe to the Royal Audit and hit the notification bell. We want to hear your voice. Tell us in the comments below, was this $67 million well spent on a matter of principle, or was it the most expensive mistake in royal history? We read every single insight. As the doors of the High Court swung open and the lawyers flooded out into the London fog, the reality began to sink in. Harry had promised to change the world with this lawsuit. Instead, he left the world with a 45-page reminder that even a prince is subject to the rules of evidence. The $67 million verdict isn't just a number on a balance sheet. It is the final audit of a crusade that ran out of credit. The Duke had bet his future on this battle, and in 30 seconds, the House of Sussex went into a state of moral and financial receivership. To understand why the $67 million legal defeat feels so inevitable in 2026, we have to look back at the moment the Sussex brand truly began to trade its moral capital for liquid cash. Go back to January of 2023. The world was watching as the memoir Spare shattered global records, selling an astonishing 1,400,000 copies on its very first day. On paper, it was a commercial triumph, but in the ledger of human decency, it was a massive withdrawal that the Duke has yet to pay back. While the checks for millions of dollars were being signed, a list of new victims was being created, people who never asked to be part of the royal narrative. Consider the woman who, for 20 years, held a private teenage secret with a young prince. She had lived her life with discretion and dignity, never once seeking a headline. Yet, in his pursuit of transparency, Harry exposed her to the global stage, turning a private memory into a commercial asset for a bestseller. Then, there was the even more disturbing revelation regarding his time at Eton. In the pages of the memoir, the Duke chose to publicly mock a former teacher, a woman who struggled with specific physical and health challenges. He used her appearance as a cruel punchline to add colour to his teenage angst. This wasn't a fight against the press or a stand for justice. This was the bullying of a private citizen who had dedicated her life to education. Investigative author Tom Bauer, observing the fallout from these revelations, did not hold back in his assessment. He was overheard during a London media briefing stating that the hypocrisy was almost breathtaking. He reportedly remarked that a man who has spent years crying on global television about his right to privacy had, with a single book, created a whole new category of victims. Bauer noted that Harry was willing to sell out a defenseless former teacher and a private acquaintance just to ensure his royalty checks reached the necessary heights. He questioned how anyone could take a privacy campaign seriously when the campaigner was the one profiting from the exposure of others. The dialogue inside London's most exclusive circles at the time was equally sharp. One member of the old guard was overheard at a private club saying that the betrayal of the teacher was the final straw. They reportedly said that in the upper echelons of British society, you can forgive many things, but you never forgive the mocking of those who cannot defend themselves. It was described as a moment of cultural bankruptcy. This is the true cost that isn't reflected in the royalty statements. You can use the honor and the secrets of the people around you to buy your way to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list, but you cannot buy back the respect of the world you left behind. By 2026, we see the result of this moral math. The massive sales numbers have faded, but the social boycott from the London elite remains permanent. The Duke of Sussex traded his social standing for a $100 million media deal, only to find that without that standing, the media deal has no long-term value. He became a man who was famous for telling on others, a role that has a very short shelf life in the halls of power. As we look at the wreckage of his latest courtroom loss, it becomes clear that the world is no longer interested in the truth of a man who sold the privacy of others to the highest bidder. But the question remains, if his friends and teachers were the first to be sold, who is left on the list of assets to be liquidated? The answer might be closer to home than anyone dares to admit. At the center of this legal firestorm is a mechanism that the public rarely sees, the legal gravy train. While Prince Harry was busy projecting the image of a noble crusader to the world, a team of high-priced solicitors and barristers were busy running a clock that billed by the second. To them, the Duke of Sussex was not a client to be protected. He was a distress asset to be mined for every possible pound. In the high-stakes world of London litigation, there is an old saying, the only people who truly win a lawsuit are the lawyers. In 2026, that has never been more evident. Look at the targets of these relentless attacks. The Murdoch empire, known as News Group newspapers, and the Mirror Group. These are massive corporations with bottomless legal war chests. Any competent lawyer would advise a client that taking on these giants is a gamble with terrifying odds. Yet, Harry was reportedly surrounded by a chorus of legal advisors who continuously whispered that he was certain to prevail. They leaned into his pride, fueled his grievances, and convinced him that he was the only man who could bring the British media to its knees. The financial cost of this ego-driven strategy is staggering. We are talking about tens of millions of pounds in legal fees, money that flows directly from Harry's inheritance into the pockets of firms in London's legal district. One source close to the legal proceedings was overheard saying that the atmosphere in the law offices was almost celebratory every time a new claim was filed. They allegedly noted that the Duke was the perfect client because his desire for vengeance was so strong that he rarely questioned the mounting costs. He was paying for a victory that was never coming. But the most shocking discovery occurred within the walls of the High Court itself. During the discovery phase, the court unearthed something that destroyed any remaining moral high ground for the Sussex legal team. It was a document that the judge later described as a concocted fraudulent statement. This was not a simple clerical error or a misunderstanding of the law. It was a phony piece of evidence, a manufactured narrative designed to bolster a weak case. The moment of realization in the courtroom was reported to be chilling. As the inconsistencies in the statement were laid bare, a senior lawyer for the defense was overheard telling a colleague that the entire claim was now toxic. The court realised the statement was fraudulent when it was already too late for Harry to settle outside of court. He had been led to the edge of a cliff by his own team, and the phony evidence was the final push. The judge noted in his written ruling that the use of such a concocted statement called into question the integrity of the entire claim. I want to issue a direct challenge to everyone watching this right now. Look at the filings. Look at the public records of these court cases. The lawyers surrounding Harry were not protecting him. They were exploiting a man who had lost his sense of perspective. They were harvesting fees from a brand that was already in decline. Do the math for yourself. When you subtract the $67 million in losses from the Sussex's remaining capital, and then add the tens of millions paid to the legal teams, who is the real winner here? It certainly isn't the Duke. The legal gravy train has reached its final destination, and the only people left on the platform with full pockets are the men in the expensive suits who promised Harry a victory they knew they couldn't deliver. The audit reveals a harsh truth. In his war against the press, Harry became the primary victim of the very people he paid to lead the charge. As the bills continue to come due, one has to ask, how much is left in the vault for the next battle? The period between 2024 and the middle of 2026 will likely be remembered by historians as the era of the Great Sussex Collapse. What was once marketed as a global empire of compassion and billion-dollar media deals has effectively transformed into a sequence of falling dominoes. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of a brand, not by outside enemies, but by a catastrophic internal drain of credibility and capital. The first major domino to fall was Sentebale, the charity Harry co-founded in Africa to honour his mother's legacy. In a stunning reversal of fortune, the organisation became embroiled in a public governance dispute so severe that it made headlines across 3 continents. Internal documents leaked in early 2025 revealed a fractured leadership, leading to the moment Harry was forced to resign as a trustee permanently, but the crisis didn't end with his departure. In a move that sent shockwaves through the philanthropic world, Sentebale is currently pursuing a defamation lawsuit against its own co-founder. One former associate of the charity was overheard saying that the Harry effect had become so toxic that the organisation had to sue its creator just to prove to donors that they were still professional. Then came the darkness surrounding African parks. While Harry sat comfortably on the board of directors, a series of harrowing reports emerged alleging brutal human rights abuses against Indigenous tribes by park rangers. For a man who built his brand on the concept of global empathy, the silence was deafening. The audit of his tenure on the board shows a leader who was either dangerously out of touch or entirely unwilling to face the consequences of the organisations he endorsed. Perhaps the most telling sign of the blood-drained empire is the state of the Archewell Foundation itself. In 2026, the very heart of the Sussex operation has effectively been shuttered. Regulatory filings show the foundation was placed on a delinquent list due to a failure to file transparent financial records and unresolved tax issues. A financial analyst reviewing the public data remarked that Archewell looked less like a functioning charity and more like a shell company that had simply run out of oxygen. The millions that once flowed in from high net worth donors have dried up, leaving behind a trail of legal warnings and unpaid administrative fees. But the most devastating blow was delivered to the crown jewel of Harry's legacy, the Invictus Games. For years, Invictus was the one project that remained untouchable, a symbol of genuine service. However, in early 2026, Boeing, the game's largest diamond-level sponsor, officially announced it was withdrawing all funding. The statement from the aerospace giant was cold and corporate, but the message was clear. They could no longer align their brand with a risk asset. Following Boeing's lead, a dozen other commercial partners fled the scene, leaving the upcoming games in a state of financial insolvency. Investigative author Tom Bauer, analysing this chain reaction of failure, coined a term that has now become synonymous with the Duke. Bauer was overheard at a press club event stating that Harry has officially become the king of chaos. He reportedly noted that wherever the Duke goes, a media circus and a trail of scandals inevitably follow. Bauer remarked that no prestigious brand or established institution wants to attach its name to a mobile liability. This is the domino effect in real time. When your brand is built on the shifting sands of celebrity grievance, rather than the solid ground of institutional stability, the collapse is not a matter of if, but when. As the Sussexes look toward the final half of 2026, they find themselves in a position of total isolation. The charities are gone, the sponsors have fled, and the foundation is silent. The King of Chaos is left presiding over an empty court, and the world is beginning to wonder, when the last domino falls, what will be left of the man who once thought he could reinvent the monarchy? To understand the total collapse of the $67 million legal crusade, one must look beyond the courtrooms and the balance sheets. One must look at the human architecture of the Sussex operation. In the high-stakes world of international branding, Meghan Markle is often portrayed as a loving spouse, but a deeper audit suggests she functions more like a sophisticated venture capitalist. She did not just marry a prince. She acquired a distressed asset. She identified Harry's core vulnerabilities, his deep-seated resentment toward the media and his fragile sense of self-importance, and she leveraged them to build a new commercial entity. The strategy was brilliant in its cold efficiency. By reinforcing Harry's belief that he was a perpetual victim of a cruel system, she created a psychological dependency that isolated him from his primary support networks, his family, his military friends, and his country. One former staff member at Archwell reportedly observed that the environment felt less like a professional office and more like a high-intensity re-education centre. They were overheard saying that Harry was constantly being fed a diet of grievance, told that every headline was a personal attack, and every royal protocol was an act of oppression. He was encouraged to burn every bridge, all while being told he was finally free. Investigative author Tom Bauer, who has spent years peeling back the layers of this operation, offered a chilling assessment of this dynamic. He was overheard at a private event in London stating that Meghan is the true source of the rot. He reportedly remarked that she is focused entirely on self-aggrandizement, the meticulous polishing of her personal brand, and the maximization of profit for her own individual ledger. Bauer noted that she possesses a singular, terrifying focus. She does not care who is destroyed or what institution is dismantled, as long as she remains the center of the narrative. To her, Harry was the ultimate prop, the royal key that could unlock the global stage. The most disturbing aspect of this brainwashing strategy is the disparity in awareness. Analysts who have studied their public appearances in 2026 have noted a sharp contrast. Meghan is a professional actress who understands exactly where the cameras are and when to stop a particular performance to avoid total PR ruin. Harry, however, appears to have lost that internal compass. He has been so deeply immersed in this bubble of manufactured victimhood that he no longer sees the limits of the game. He continues to launch lawsuits and release damaging memoirs, seemingly unaware that the world has moved on. Consider this cold, analytical truth. Meghan is shrewd enough to realize when a project has reached its expiration date. Harry, however, remains trapped in a loop of his own making. He is isolated in a self-woven bubble where he genuinely believes he is a hero fighting for justice. But from the outside, the world sees a very different picture. The public sees a man who has effectively dismantled his own heritage to provide content for a streaming platform. He believes he is the victim of his family, but the global audit suggests he is the one who has systematically attacked them for financial gain. As the legal bills mount and the $67 million debt looms over their Montecito estate, one has to wonder about the private conversations happening behind closed doors. Sources close to the couple have whispered that the atmosphere is increasingly transactional. If Harry is no longer the Prince of the High Court and his commercial value is in freefall, what happens to the venture capitalists' interest in the asset? The world is watching the legal collapse, but the true crisis may be the moment Harry realizes that the person who promised him freedom was actually the one who wrote the script for his isolation. But as we move into the final chapter of this audit, a new, even more expensive secret is about to be revealed. As we move into the final months of 2026, the atmosphere surrounding the Montecito estate is no longer one of defiant independence, but of profound isolation. The $67 million legal judgment has acted as a catalyst, accelerating a process that was already well underway, the total evaporation of public sympathy. In the world of high-stakes reputation, there is a point where the victim narrative becomes so expensive and so repetitive that the audience simply stops paying attention. In London, the response has been the ultimate institutional cold shoulder. Buckingham Palace has reportedly issued a quiet internal directive to sever all remaining secure communication channels with the Duke and Duchess. The reasoning, according to sources within the royal household, is as simple as it is devastating. One senior official was overheard explaining to a colleague that you cannot maintain a private dialogue with someone who views every confidential conversation as potential intellectual property for a streaming giant or a publishing house. They reportedly remarked that trust was not just damaged, it was sold for a royalty check that has now been spent on legal fees. The irony of Harry's current position is almost poetic in its cruelty. Throughout his memoirs and interviews, he spoke with visceral hatred for what he called the men in grey, the high-ranking palace courtiers he nicknamed the Bee and the Wasp. He portrayed them as the architects of his misery, the gatekeepers who stifled his freedom. Yet, in 2026, Harry finds himself in a position of total helplessness against those very men. Every aspect of his life in the United Kingdom, his travel arrangements, his request for police protection, his access to royal residences sits entirely on the desks of the men in grey. A former courtier was overheard at a London social club noting the shift in the power dynamic. He reportedly said that the Duke spent years trying to burn down the house of his ancestors, only to find that he now needs to ask the caretakers of that house for a place to stay. He noted that while Harry may have his freedom in California, his status in Britain is now managed as a matter of cold administrative protocol. He is no longer a brother or a son in the eyes of the office. He is a security risk and a legal liability to be managed. The audit of the Sussex strategy reveals a fundamental error in judgment. They attempted to play a game of high-level commercial chess against the very institution that invented the board and wrote the rules over 1,000 years ago. Now, the prince, who is fifth in the line of succession, stands alone in a desert of his own making. The aristocratic punchline is this: you can buy a $14 million mansion in Montecito, and you can spend $67 million on lawyers to fight the world, but you can never buy back the respect of your bloodline once you have traded it for a headline. As the sun sets on the King of Chaos and his venture capitalist partner, we are left to witness the aftermath of the most expensive ego trip in history. The credits are rolling on the Sussex production, and the final balance sheet is written in red ink. But what do you think? Is this $67 million debt the final curtain for the House of Sussex, or is Meghan Markle already scouting for a new lifeline to keep the brand afloat? We want to hear your calculations in the comments below. Is there any way back from a deficit this deep? If you want to stay updated as we audit the final collapse of this royal drama, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the Royal Audit. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the true cost of the crown. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next analysis.